From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know.
Right now, there are more than 11,000 global SWIFT member institutions, minus 8. So that's, 8 Russian banks. They sent an average of 42 million messages per day through this network alone in 2021, which actually is a little over an 11% increase in frequency from 2020. Yeah, fine. Okay, I'm throwing a lot of numbers out there, but what the hell is SWIFT exactly? It's not a financial institution, is the thing. It's not like, your Bank of America or what have you. It's not like the Federal Reserve. It is a messaging network that all these institutions Matt, Noel, and I are describing use to securely transmit information and then instructions about a banking transaction through a standardized system of codes. So like if you ever look on the back of a book, you see an ISBN, right? That's a standardized coding system describing a specific book. Or if you are in a grocery store in many parts of the world, if you look at a mass-produced food product, you turn it around and then you'll usually see a barcode, a UPC. SWIFT is sort of like that, but it is much more secure. SWIFT also doesn't hold or transfer money itself, and it has no client accounts. It just facilitates the movement of money, and that's incredibly important to the world's most important and powerful groups of people. All of them. Or what's that Gary Oldman meme? Everyone. He's like screaming everyone, everything, whatever.
I think
I think I know that one.
I think of Ron Swanson when he says
all of the bacon, all of your bacon and eggs.
Yeah. Yes. So make sure you heard me.
Yes, so just like the reason we're citing these memes and these pop culture moments is because it's not hyperbole. All of these institutions, all of these countries would be crippled without access to SWIFT, including the United States. There are earlier examples, by the way, of people getting kicked off SWIFT, the most notably Iran. We'll get to that in a second. SWIFT gives each and every financial organization its own unique code. It has like 8 characters or 11 characters. You can find a pretty approachable and accurate breakdown on how to read those codes if you go to places like Investopedia. We don't have to go into it right now, but just so you know, if you want to be the code whisperer of SWIFT, if that is important to you, you can figure out how to read the things. The best way to explain why SWIFT is important is probably through example. Let's say you're Matt Frederick. You're in New York. Matt, you're in New York, and you have to send money to Noel, and Noel is in Italy, and cool. Matt, yeah, nice. And Matt, you are just so we can spin out this thought experiment. Matt, you are sending money to Noel because he needs to put down a deposit on the place that you guys are staying for your Italy adventure, right? And so you go to your Bank of America, your Wells Fargo, your Chase, whatever, and you just walk into New York and you want to get this money to our guy. But our guy, being based in Italy now, uses a different bank. He doesn't use Bank of America. He doesn't use Wells Fargo or Wachovia, I think was the older version of that. I just like the name Wachovia because it sounds like a weird cough. Wachovia.
I'm sending him US dollars.
You're sending him US dollars. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So how do we make those US dollars from Wachovia turn into euro in an Italian bank? It's because of Swift. You walk into your local branch there in the Big Apple, and then you say, I need to send blah, 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 blah. And then the banks make it so easy. They use Swift to communicate. So via this messaging platform, they're like, we got this guy, Matt, and he's with us. And there's this other system that this guy Noel is with, and we need to make this money make sense. In this regard, you could kind of say that Swift is like a secret language for banks. It works because pretty much every bank speaks it. It's a common financial tongue. At this point, is a good question. Why should I care? Why are you guys telling me about banking? Well, imagine your own daily expenses. Imagine that while Matt and Noel are planning their new life in Italy, I am walking up to an ATM and I find out it's out of order. That's happened to everyone in the West at some point, right? You just want to draw out a couple of bucks in cold hard cash and the ATM is out of service. But imagine that happens to you everywhere, just like with our quesadilla example in the sanctions episode. Your card doesn't work. No one will accept it. You have been removed from the ability to send or receive anything at all. This is the state of a country without Swift access. You can have all the resources in the world. It doesn't matter what they are. It could be gas, it could be lumber, it could be tin, it could be titanium, it could be wheat. You won't be able to move it outside of your border without physical transactions, without writing a check, right? And when's the last time countries trusted each other? Without, sending over gold or a massive peppercorns or whatever happens to be in vogue. To be fair, there are some competitors out there, but Swift is by far top in its class. That's what all the hubbub is about. The global international order has, in retaliation for the Ukraine invasion, removed Russia's ability to speak the common tongue of global money. And there is a phrase for this that is much more familiar than the kind of arcane ins and outs that we just discussed. That phrase is economic warfare.
Right now, if you turn on your television, if you turn on your radio, if you look on Reddit, if you go to any major news source, you will probably notice that the world is currently engaging in economic warfare, and there is a real hot land war occurring in Eastern Europe. Right now, it's the biggest land war that has happened in that area in decades, and it really sucks. It sucks for everybody, and it's scary. And I mean, really think about it. Russia is engaging with Ukraine right now. It's a nuclear power. Many of the NATO countries have nuclear capability. Everybody is on high alert, and the lever that's being pulled right now by the West, by NATO, by all, well, it's not necessarily NATO, but by the West and by the United States, is economic, attacking the wallets, attacking the banks. I'm scared. This sucks. Let's talk about it.
There we go. Yeah, it's true. It's a dangerous balancing act. What you're seeing right now is everybody trying not to be the first person to push the button on the bomb, right? It's a tremendously, insanely high stakes game of chicken, and the innocent people of Ukraine, of Russia, of the entire region are caught in between these world powers. So the question is, how do we stop an invasion without sending in NATO? How do you stop the nukes from launching? The calculus that NATO countries eventually arrived at after a lot of dithering was to cut off Russia's military ambitions at the source. We don't need to, they thought, we don't need to bother with testing mutually assured destruction if we can just remove Russia's ability to pay for war. The inability to use this messaging platform, SWIFT, to communicate with other banks outside of Russia's border will severely hinder Russia's ability to access the money they need to continue the assault in Ukraine. It's an interesting strategy. It is not a new one by any means. And the way it's being reported in the U.S. bears a little bit more scrutiny, I would say. Only a certain number of Russian banks have been given the boot. I think there are about 7 or 8. We're talking banks that would be unfamiliar to a lot of people not in Europe, a lot of people in the US. You're gonna hear like a cavalcade of names. You know what? Let's do it. Who's got the best Russian? Who's got the best Russian voice?
Not me.
I think it's you, bro.
I did not mean to volunteer myself for the front line.
I'll give you a couple of these. There's TB, which it may actually be recognizable to you. I've seen images of that before. Rosaya. There's Otkriti, Novikombank. Sure. There's a bunch of those. I'm not going to be able to pronounce correctly. You can find a list of all over the place. Recommend you checking it out.
Well, I mean, look, here's the thing. I mean, we know from our last episode and just from paying attention and just knowing what we know about Putin in general that dude's a pretty calculated character, and he has, been planning this invasion for a long time. We have seen that there are likely some setbacks and that he maybe overplayed his hand a little bit, but he is maintaining the line that everything is going on schedule and everything's going exactly as planned. Don't you think he would have seen these sanctions coming?
Oh, yeah.
And had a contingency plan? I mean, like, it just seems to me like it's just going to piss him off rather than actually hinder his advance. And really, it's just trickling down to screwing over the average Russian citizens.
Well, yeah. And also, we're going to talk about blowback here because economic warfare is more unpredictable than the policy wonks and the boffins would have the average person believe. The banks that Matt mentioned are given 10 days to wind down their SWIFT operations. And you can read this. This is not scuttlebutt. It's not rumor. The exceptions to that rule are banks that handle energy payments, or banks that help facilitate the movement of gas and oil and fossil fuels. So why is this dangerous? Well, the issue is that revoking SWIFT access does not just hurt Russia. It hurts the Russian economy most immediately and most severely, but China leans heavy on Russia for trade goods. As we mentioned at the top of the show, it's important to remember that Russia itself is a massive resource exporter, right? And there are a lot of countries in the African continent, in the Middle East, that depend upon wheat in particular, cereal grains. The United Kingdom and the Netherlands also depend on Russia for a lot of trade goods. The world is interconnected now in ways that are almost impossible for one person alone to envision, to fully comprehend. And in a world of interconnected trade, shit rolls downhill. There is a domino effect. This means that Europe and the U.S. may also be adversely affected. If you live in the U.S., you may remember that a lot of the domestic opposition to conflict in the Middle East, to U.S. involvement in the Middle Eastern conflicts, came about when people started seeing gas prices rise. That's what it took. It wasn't acknowledging the tax dollars are paying for weapons of war. It wasn't acknowledging that innocent people are dying. It's that moment where someone goes, "What? $4? Well, that's the line." You know what I mean? Because now it's me. It's different because it's me.
it's pretty scary because if you think about how much oil Russia produces and exports to countries across the world, in countries like Germany, who are attempting to take steps to mitigate that issue of like cutting off the oil that they get from Russia. But it's going to get rough. And again, we're talking about grain. We're talking about all kinds of commodities. If you cut them out of the game, there's going to be more. There is demand. There's a huge demand for things like grain, food, and the ability to drive vehicles around. It's going to raise prices across the board. And it already is. I mean, drive to go get gas right now. Try it. See what you're going to come away spending quite a bit of money. And the scary thing for me is that we just talked about this. I don't even remember which episode it was, but we just discussed how inflation is happening all around us, especially here in the U.S., that we notice it most immediately because it is at the gas station. Consumer prices, listen to this, rose 7.5%.
Yeah, up to January. And I love the point you're making there, Matt, because the fossil fuel rise, right? The rise in demand for fossil fuel ultimately will fall on anything you buy that is in any way affected by fossil fuel. So we're talking about trucking, we're talking about cargo ships, we're talking about keeping the lights on at your house, your energy bills, etc. This hits globally. That's the thing. Russia produces about 10 million barrels of oil every day. That's about 10% of current global consumption. And analysts, like people who spend their lives studying the fossil fuel industry, are concerned that oil prices could surge to $120 a barrel thanks to this conflict.